encabezado por la Unión Soviética.
My name's Wayne Sonter. I'm a person that comes from the North Coast, moved to the city. I like to think I'm still a bit of a country boy, but apparently I'm not. I'm an extremely sophisticated cosmopolitan urbanite. I'm being asked about why I've become a communist. I think it was, I suppose you can look at a passionate side and an intellectual side. It was the ideas of Marx that attracted me first. I did political science and sociology at the last moment at university. Initially I was going to do psychology with an English second. Psychology was a lot of behaviourist bullshit, I decided, especially when they stuck the O of the organism between the stimulus and the response, which would seem to have denoted, well, wasn't that what we were trying to talk about in the first place, was the organism. By the time I finished high school and went to uni, I was already starting to explore social psychology and sociology, because I was travelling around hitchhiking and read that whenever I got to a library, that sort of stuff. And so at the last moment I dropped doing physiology and did sociology that went with my political science, and ended up I graduated political science sociology at a very conservative school. But I did manage through the course of that to end up with a Maoist tutor in political science and a Trotskyist tutor in sociology. So it gradually moved that I'm intellectual. I'm not the sort of person that grew up, I'm not a third generation communist. My family would be small, petty bourgeois. My father's a tradesman in the country, businesses are small. He had his own business after a while, joined the bourgeoisie by employing an apprentice. My mother's side were farmers, so that sort of background. And my first I had two things that stirred my radicalism. Was we used to be visited at our school by the very sophisticated students from Armidale, and I'd left home and moved into the laundry downstairs, and a guy from that university burnt his driver's licence on my radiator as a protest against the Vietnam War, which was obviously a lot further away than Tingha, which was about as far as we'd ever sort of travelled at that stage. That, and I sort of started to get to be an adolescent slouch a bit, and started wearing suede shoes without shoelaces and letting my hair grow long and failing to do up my buttons around the place, and got into a lot of trouble from the principal, and was given an ultimatum of a number of days to get myself shipped up or shipped out. But I got, I think, everyone in 5th and 6th years 11 and 12 to sign a petition demanding freedom in our clothing from the strict uniform. And when I was brought in to see what I'd done about his ultimatum, gave him the petition with about 200 names on it, demanding our right to dress like slobs if we wanted to. So really it was quite elemental, that sort of rebellion. So we'll call that the passionate side. But doing the rigour of a conservative school was basically in many ways deconstructing. Sociology was a bit more radical. Psychology, the 1 year I did it, was very behaviourist. And I found myself attracted towards the quite beautiful integral systems and philosophy of Karl Marx. But then on the other hand, most probably my second favourite philosopher in that understanding would have been Thomas Hobbes, who I saw as another very thorough, consistent intellectual creation of a system. And it was sort of, in a way, a bit gratifying that when Karl Marx was looking at materialist philosophy, included people like Thomas Hobbes and what's his name, More, as a part of the materialist tradition. Yeah, so I suppose I found myself, I suppose I revolted against God when I was about 12. I climbed up on my deceased grandfather's library where they'd stuck his books because none of the rest of the family read except him, and I found a whole lot of turn of the 19th century to 20th century humanist philosophy, and raised questions like we should do good because good's for the good of humanity, not to win brownie points to get into heaven. So that was my first scepticism. And as a result of that, I raised it with my local minister on some things, and I was basically told to shut up and have faith and don't reason too deeply, which didn't have the effect that he intended. It mainly meant that I didn't go back to church again. So, but I've grappled, so I see it's grappling with those sorts of issues. I was very much a reader as a child, as well as a tear-about. I usually get home covered in mud and dirt, and usually had at least one fight every day of my primary school. And so they were, I suppose that's the emotional, but by reading Marx, at that stage people didn't read, you didn't study Lenin or even Trotsky at universities, but it was a lot of the there was a Marxist, meaning communist, intelligentsia in academia that were based on the old CPA. Why would I join a party? Well, I've joined a number of parties before I joined the Communist Party. My first, I don't know where this is going, but anyway, if you want to expel me, feel free, is the first party I joined via my sociology tutor was to join the Socialist Labour League, as it was called then, which was very good. That's where I felt they were a lot more disciplined, they were very rigorous, they really laid it into things like the Socialist Workers' Party, which I agree with what they were saying, but I also, after that I joined it. By the time I was 21, I joined the Labor Party. I was in that for a long time, but I saw myself as a Marxist and a socialist within the Labor Party. But I left that by the time that Bob Hawke came around, because it was so far beyond the pale by then. Things like the Whitlam dismissal were quite significant impacts on my life and lots of others. I'd say I still maintain the rage that the rest of them, especially Labour Party, have either forgotten or don't care about anymore. If nothing else, if you looked at it dispassionately, you have to say that showed that reform would not be allowed to work. Just in my life, I was finding myself in situations. A lot of being a student, I became a squatter, I was involved in movements like employment, rights to work and things like that. As opposed to getting a real job full time and having a career, I sort of deviated off into that rather than up into the establishment and the career structure. It never changed really. I did have some intervening periods of employment between childhood and dotage, but it only through all those things I found that I was mixing the struggles or the issues I was involved with. I would then go back and read back through a lot of Marx, but then also started to read Lenin, Trotsky, Mao from university, and a whole range of others, people that write on Marxism, the scholars that aren't so famous, but they write on it and give insights, some people reckon they've read Capital, but you need to read lots of people writing on capital or writing on whatever's around to help you understand those things, like any literature review, you know. So it's just, I've found that it is, as an activist, you make that commitment. I say, after such knowledge, what forgiveness is. Once you know that this is the way things work, you would have to lobotomise yourself to not do it. And a lot of people do lobotomise themselves. They're called revisionists, I think. They, you know, oh, it's inevitable that you go from the left to the right as you get older. Well, no, it's not. It's a matter of, on the other hand, you might be getting deeper understanding through your praxis, your actions and your readings and your discussion. And it's just as a likely propensity that you will become more deep in your understanding and more committed to your course of action. Saying, am I a communist? In a lot of ways, it's a bit like, am I a Christian? You know, it's up to others to judge, in a way, whether you're a communist or a Christian. Self-proclamation also is no, self-praise is no recommendation. You know, to proclaim you're a communist, or like Bob Hawke would, that he was a great Aussie and Australia first, when you know the secret is he was a CIA asset, so he really counted that on the surface by what he was underneath. Is being a communist should be an aspiration, and in many ways I see that sometimes a hard understanding, or an understanding you think is very firm, when you look more closely and with the experience of the years, you notice different depths and resonances in the understanding. And like we say, is if you read the Communist Manifesto every year of your life and you were active throughout that life, you would see something new in it that you didn't pick up. And I suspect even when the young Marx and Engels were writing it, even they picked up on it, they themselves, which is, you know, following years of developing theories at length, was they didn't know exactly what they'd come up with when it was crystallised at that moment of what was revolution in Europe at the time. So as I've gone on, I'm getting a different understanding of what this process of the revolutionary transformation of capitalism into communism is, and I'm getting more tolerant. Yeah, I look at Venezuela and say, yes, they're doing it in a way that's not guaranteeing success. The Communist Party in Venezuela is constantly acting as egging it on. But there's a revolution, to the extent there's a revolution going on in there, at the moment it's not led by the most conscious and committed elements of the class. They are still fighting for the step ahead, and the mainstream, the body, let's call them the social democrats, are leading with the most conscious and committed, agitating as an outrigger. So that's, but then when you look back on that, before there were communist parties, and Marx and Engels just defined communists as being an integral part of the working class, just its most conscious and committed elements, we will always have a catalytic and agitational role. We will always, as I say, be looking at the understanding and delineating the line of trend and advocating that to our class. So in a sense I say, well, maybe I'm a small c communist. There are a lot of people that would see themselves as communists that are no longer or never were in the Communist Party. There are people within other formations, even ones that I think are dreadful, but within those organisations there would be people that are more conscious and committed than others, even if their party might have in many ways a wrong line. So leading into a revolutionary period like we are now is, I'm open to maybe the revolutionary vanguard is not yet there. It is still crystallising out of numbers of different elements. So if you take those sort of things into it, I define myself as a communist in the understanding of that doesn't automatically infer anything, but I like to think I'm a part of the ongoing struggle, and I hope I'm getting an understanding that's valuable and can be passed on. Okay. Over the years, my specific involvements, I'd say that even though squatting was basically a lot of anarchists and just mishmash, I think that was approached as a Marxist. I approached that, though it makes me wonder now. But it was the idea of getting in the way of capitalism, counter to its things. and an understanding of way it works. So squatting was an involvement of commitment of an activist. At that time I was in with also unemployed unions and things like that. One of the things was a shorter work week action committee and a network that became very worldwide, thin but a worldwide coverage for a number of years, but it was a lot of work and didn't have time to properly do it. But also up on the North Coast we formed, worked with a group, we formed employment and resource development associations, and from there we were able to establish a whole range of peace groups through there, active as I call it the spine or the backup in a lot of environmental and resident groups that would otherwise have not had, I'll call it the presence of viral communists. It wasn't where they were communist organisations, but there was a loose network of communists that we worked in a number of popular organisations and working class organisations. Even up there I worked in the Labor Party, formed a very left-wing branch, and grew it from about 5 or 7 up to into 55, 60 people over a number of years, and caused lots of very interesting perturbations amongst both Nationals and Labor Party up there. Solidarity groups with Auss-Iraq, the solidarity with Iraq and Australians via trade union, solidarity with DPRK, Hands Off Syria, but I seem to have a lot of current one is just trying to build and renew the Communist Party itself, because there's no greater time or need for a revolutionary vanguard organisation. If there is a future, it will have to be eventually communist. It's the start of human history, and to have that we must end this super destructive now global system based on class and exploitation. Sorry. We can't continue to exploit ourselves and nature and have a future. So yes, I see a communist future if we survive long enough to overthrow the class that's destroying the planet.